I'm Mark Dresner, and this is Forward Focus, a special interview series featuring experts and leaders at the forefront of innovation. Forward Focus is brought to you by the Front End of Innovation Conference, FEI, the world leader in advancing innovation, now entering its 15th year. Joining us today is Alexa Clay. She's a culture hacker and innovation strategist and co-author of the book, The Misfit Economy, Lessons in Creativity from Pirates, Hackers, Gangsters, and other informal entrepreneurs. Alexa, welcome to the program.
Great, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. Let's talk a little bit, first of all, the book title, The Misfit Economy, but I've heard you reference the new economy as well. So I want to go into that. What is the new economy and what are the implications for innovation?
Yeah, I mean, I think the new economy gets referenced kind of in 10-year cycles often. And so it's really a placeholder for a lot of different things. I think part of the ambition of the Misfit economy is really to ask hard questions of what does it look like when we break out of command and control systems? So what are new types of management? What can we learn from hacker collectives? For example, what can we learn from different kinds of fringe organizations around how to run big organizations? And so really, new economy is a stand-in for thinking about the moment that we're in. We're in a moment of enormous transition where institutions, multinational companies are really going to have to figure out how they evolve. How do they develop new cultures to fit a really different kind of employee profile? How do they cater to misfits, to people that are really thinking outside of the box and trying to bring their whole selves into the workplace? And so it's really, really asking questions about, during this enormous moment of transition, what are the alternative practices that are out there? How do we think about management really differently?
Interesting. I want to come, and there's an identity issue inherent in that, and I want to come back to that later. But I want to talk about some of the projects you're involved. One of the interesting projects that you're involved with is the League of Entrepreneurs, which is dedicated to basically transforming business from the inside out, as I understand it. Could you tell us about that? And then, sort of building on that, why is it necessary and important?
Yeah, so the League of Entrepreneurs, not to be confused with entrepreneurs, but yeah, the first time spent talking about the League is really just socializing people to this concept of entrepreneurship. Because if you look out there, there's so many resources dedicated to entrepreneurs. There are tons of membership associations, of clubs, of self-help books, of venture capitalists, all supporting that idea of the heroic entrepreneur. And yet there are no resources really for entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs don't have the same type of community, same kinds of support mechanisms. And so what we've been doing with the League is really creating space, pulling together these moments where entrepreneurs can connect. They're really operating entrepreneurially within huge organizations, really going against the cultures, going against the grain, trying to build out disruptive business models, trying to bring in alternative thinking. And so they need a lot of support. And so that's one of the things we're doing, creating a kind of Alcoholics Anonymous-like support group for these people to say, hey, I'm an entrepreneur, and wear that freak flag a little bit. And they're just some of the most incredible people that I've ever met in any kind of organization. They just give me goosebumps, really. People thinking about completely reinventing businesses, getting their companies to perform better on human rights, on thinking about, the future of mobility or finance. They're really those deviants, those tempered radicals who are going to be key to allowing those institutions to evolve, and yet they're not often catered to. Management doesn't really understand how to nurture or create enabling environments for entrepreneurs.
Yeah, well, and if anything, it's more about controlling and containing them, right?
Yeah.
How did you find these people? How did it come about?
It was really hard. It felt, both my parents are anthropologists, so for me this felt like a lost tribe that I discovered within the corporate trenches. But just, talking to people, getting introductions, funnily enough, working even, within an organization, you'll often have entrepreneurs that are just isolated from each other. So part of the task becomes nurturing these informal guerrilla networks of entrepreneurs, even within the same company, so they can find like-minded species, if you will, and begin finding, champions of their work, a supportive entourage of other people that get it, that can be that support team for socializing new ideas within the organization.
Now, this is kind of inferred here, basically, but it brings me to our next question beautifully, and that is, bureaucratic barriers and inertia that are, sort of the natural byproducts, right, of corporate culture and which impede innovation. What tools, techniques, methods do you believe can overcome some of these? Do you have any thoughts for us?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many barriers really within these entrenched bureaucracies. And one is just a mindset thing. So much of our educational system is set up to make someone a dutiful employee, that they're not trained in entrepreneurship. So just even the possibilities of really coming up with new types of ventures or really thinking outside of the box and giving oneself permission to be really experimental within an organization can be a bit countercultural. But then you also face, strategic and systemic barriers. So sometimes, a company feeling like, oh, that's not aligned with core business, or you see these constant sort of defense mechanisms, or just the nature of really looking at quarterly returns, which means that, long-term business models get discounted. And so one thing I've really been focused on is what are the tools, what are the practices that entrepreneurs can use that they can master to help them in their work. And part of that is just navigating the political systems, not trying to sort of just pitch and be a good salesman within an organization, but giving away ownership around ideas. So really understanding, how do decisions get made within my organization? What are the key motivations, the psychological drivers of different decision makers? And how do I grow communities of support around an idea? If an entrepreneur has a good idea, they kind of become this kind of vain ego shouting that idea from the rooftops. But if you're an entrepreneur, you actually have to be incredibly camouflaged. You don't want to celebrate that idea egoistically. You want other people to be able to run with it, to be able to socialize it and champion it within the company. So it requires a lot of humility and a lot of persistence, a lot of art in navigating how to drive change within an organization. Making the business case is one of the most important things that we teach. So how do you make a rationally minded case for your idea, but how do you balance that with an emotional pitch? How do you assign it to different corporate priorities within the organization? How do you tell historic stories of innovation within your company that tie to the initiative that you might be trying to pitch? And so from the Misfit work, there's actually a lot that entrepreneurs can learn from con artists who have an amazing ability to paint these alternative versions of reality and sort of hoodwink us into their schemes. One thing that we've been looking at is some of the tactics that con artists use to really make their realities crystallize for people. So one fantastic entrepreneur that I met with actually developed a completely fake press release to get the chairman of his company interested in the idea that he was pitching. And so, how do we be imaginative? How do we be creative in getting some of these ideas across?
I love it. And again, that leads me right into our next question. These misfits that you talk about in the title of your book, who are they? What do they have to do with innovation? Why should we pay attention to them? And perhaps most importantly, how can we use them in our organizations?
I think there are a number of different misfits. So the entrepreneurs, for example, those are the insider misfits, the ones that have to be more camouflaged. So different from the activist misfit, who is loud with their agenda and really is trying to provoke and shake up systems from the outside. Then, I've written a lot about underground misfits, so pirates and hackers and gangsters. And, King Tone from the Latin Kings was here with me today, sharing about his own stories of leadership challenges and trying to do change management of an underground organization. And so I think that people learned a lot from some of those, underground lessons in leadership. And so it's really, really focused on this idea of, well, what is the fringe doing? What can we learn, for example, from hackers about open source culture that we can apply to developing open innovation cultures within big business? This world without bosses, for example, has been really popularized by art collectives or by social movements or by hacker collectives. And so what are some of those different holacracy type management principles that we can begin experimenting within corporate culture? one of the things I mentioned today was around this idea of LARPing, live action role playing, which is a very nerdy subculture, often associated with nerds running around in the woods with swords, but it is an amazing ability to prototype innovation. You know, if you can create a fictitious reality around the future of finance, it's an amazing way to see, well, what do those tools, what do the customers look like when you actually embody that reality? So I'd love to see more corporations play with LARPing as a medium for innovating, for example.
And I just out of curiosity, can you give us an example of pirates, for example? That one just stuck out to me. Where is the innovation tie to pirates?
Well, historic pirates, we did a bit of research around this, and they were fascinating because they developed democratic constitutions before Western democracies had constitutions. So before France, before England had these democratic revolutions, pirates were using democratic constitutions to govern their ships. Right. They also had really interesting pay structures. So they had much more egalitarian pay systems between the captain and the crew. And a lot of the pirates were actually escaping merchant vessel systems. So they were escaping very industrialized systems and going over to these pirate vessels, which is not dislike a lot of millennials fleeing these old corporations and going to these startups. So there's something about, you know, this underdog culture within pirate culture that is incredibly attractive, that becomes a bit of a brand magnet for a lot of people. So that's one element of pirates. And then in present day life, you also hear a lot about Somali pirates, a business that's now more in decline, but just the doggedness of people who created a complete market from nowhere. And that's now been clamped down upon, really. And they're looking at different kinds of business models. But, you know, within informal economies, within black market economies, you just see this amazing ability to create opportunity, economic opportunity out of environments that are extremely constrained and frugal. And I think that's part of the formula, that scarcity is the mother of invention. So how do we bring more of that hustler spirit into our companies?
I love it. Speaking of sort of, you mentioned LARPing, but you have an alter ego, the Amish futurist, and I think that kind of dovetails with this. How do you see identity playing a role in the imperative to revise how we think about innovation?
I think it's incredibly important, this identity piece. So one thing that I use alter egos for is this ability to be a bit of a shapeshifter. And entrepreneurs need to do that too. You have to sort of code switch. You have to change your language depending on what stakeholders you're speaking to. You know, you have to be able to sort of network with communities outside your organization, with internal stakeholders. And so for me, alter egos are really around this identity hacking piece that my alter ego, Rebecca, is the Amish futurist, but she goes to startup conferences dressed as an Amish woman. And it's completely, it transforms the conversation. We really try and talk about, you know, through her perspective, what does more intentional technology look like? How do we develop better platforms, better apps that are actually needed in the world, that have a real impact on communities? And so amongst startup founders, it opens up this confessional space for them to talk about innovation that is meaningful, that is significant. And for me, it's great because I get to access this moral voice that I wouldn't otherwise have just as me, you know, because it's I can talk about like the sinful or vain nature of Facebook likes and these things that I couldn't just talk about in my own language because I'm more of a secular person. So I think alter egos professionally allow us to access really different kinds of superpowers that we all have that might be dormant because they don't fit with an idea of who we think we should be. So internally, there are certainly a number of ways, I'm sure, that you could actually put that to work in practice in an organization. Alter egos?
Yeah.
I mean, even just running a meeting, for example, I think so often we show up to meetings playing ourselves. So if you're the critical one, you're always playing the critical one role. If you're the leader, you're always playing that like kind of alpha role. If you're the note taker or the person who doesn't say anything. And so even how do you play with those roles in a meeting? You know, how do you give people different identities where, you know, one person has to be the cheerleader and just be supportive and one person gets to be the troll or the critic? And I think that kind of of playfulness allows people to bring much more creativity and just joy into their life because they're not boxed into a particular identity.
Yeah, this is all fantastic stuff, Alexa. Thank you so much for sharing with us. Yeah. That concludes this episode of Forward Focus. If you'd like to learn more about FEI, the Front End of Innovation Conference, please visit us online at frontendofinnovation.com. Until next time, I'm Mark Dresner, and you've just heard the Insight Scoop.